Studying Prabhupada's teachings without studying his life and how he lived and applied those teachings can become impersonal. And becoming attached to Prabhupada's personality without studying and following his teachings can become sentimental. Both approaches leave us with a, quote, fictional Prabhupada we should avoid. Let's look at some examples. So I've organized the fictions into two groups, and the first group I call Impersonal Fictions. Quote, Prabhupada is God. Strange as it sounds, this fiction once possessed some of Prabhupada's leading disciples. It happened during the summer of 1970. That spring, Prabhupada had encountered a threat to his movement. While expanding Krishna consciousness in the Americas and Europe, he was meeting some resistance in India. A few inimical swamis were trying to prevent ISKCON from acquiring land in Mayapur, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Worse, they were spreading a minimized view of Prabhupada, which was affecting the faith of some of his leading disciples in America. To counter the threat, in July, Srila Prabhupada formed a governing body commission of trusted devotees, whom he would prepare to manage the movement's worldwide preaching in his absence. After correcting the misled leaders, he deployed 4 of them as sannyasis to travel and preach with full faith in Guru and Krishna. As the young renunciants toured ISKCON America that summer, the gravity of their offense to Prabhupada weighed on them. Mortified at how they had been minimizing his spiritual stature, they began to maximize him, even deify him, citing scriptural references about the spiritual master being non-different from Krishna himself. In late August, the group traveled to New Vrindavan, West Virginia, for the Janmashtami Vyasa Puja festivals, amid the largest gathering of ISKCON devotees to date. The sannyasis' apocalyptic message, Prabhupada is God, and because we haven't recognized him, he has rejected us and gone back to India. Without understanding that Prabhupada is Krishna, our chanting is useless. Their propaganda so disturbed the devotees that the governing body phoned Prabhupada for guidance. Prabhupada thundered his reply, quote, they have committed the greatest offense. There is only one thing worse than underestimating the Guru, overestimating the Guru. They have said, I am God. Therefore, if I am God, they also can become God. This is impersonalism, unquote. Banishing the offenders from his society, Prabhupada said they could return if they separately opened centers, inspired people to take up devotional service, and preach the truth. The spiritual master is not God. God is God. The genuine spiritual master is God's authorized representative. Any so-called spiritual master who says he's God is as good as a dog. End of fiction. The next fiction, Impersonal Fiction. Quote, ISKCON is Prabhupada. Although less obvious than the previous fiction, the giveaway is. To equate ISKCON in all respects with Srila Prabhupada repeats the impersonal flaw of oneness without difference. Prabhupada's oft-quoted statement on the subject is flawless. Quote, "ISKCON is my body," unquote. Although this quotation was never recorded, reliable ear witness testimony is abundant, and the following Prabhupada letter excerpt says the same thing. Quote, "You are all my limbs of my body. Unless you cooperate, my life will be useless." Indeed, wherever Prabhupada's followers don't cooperate, a part of his ISKCON body falls ill. And if the non-cooperation becomes systemic, all of ISKCON falls ill. The unfailing cure, re-immersion in Srila Prabhupada's life, teachings, mood, and mission, especially his admonition to cooperate. Interestingly, Prabhupada also rejected as material this fiction's inverse. Quote, "Prabhupada is ISKCON." Quote, "Suppose if I say I am everything in this my institution, does it mean I have lost my personality? No, no. If somebody says that Bhaktivedanta Swami is everything, does it mean I have lost my personality? That is material understanding," unquote. As ISKCON's Founder-Acarya, Srila Prabhupada is certainly ISKCON. At the same time, everything in ISKCON does not equal Srila Prabhupada, his society's life and soul. As the philosopher Emerson once observed, quote, "An institution is the lengthened shadow of one man," unquote. The next impersonal fiction, I call it, quote, "The governing body commission is Prabhupada." This fiction betrays an incomplete understanding of the first item Srila Prabhupada declared in his will. Quote, "The governing body commission, GBC, will be the ultimate managing authority of the entire International Society for Krishna Consciousness," unquote. That's the very first line of Prabhupada's last will and testament, dated 4th June 1977 in Vrindavan. Sometime after Prabhupada signed his will, he called for his personal secretary in the middle of the night. The secretary's diary discloses what happened next. So this is Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and we know this because Maharaj published his diary many years later, luckily before he passed. So here's the relevant quote from the diary. This is the June 27th diary entry. Quote, "He could not sleep. Thinking of the will had kept him up." Quote, "Amongst the GBC, have you selected one after me who will succeed?" I replied that we felt that we should manage together as a group, that none of us was more qualified than the others. Quote, "Yes, each of you can be Acharya of your zone," unquote. Acharya, yes, but not the Founder-Acarya. A crucial distinction it would take the GBC years to assert. After Prabhupada's passing, regional imitations of his singular position sometimes turned ISKCON zones into cultish kingdoms. The offenses devastated many, gurus and disciples alike. After the imitation had sufficiently abated, the GBC began to consider more deeply Prabhupada's mandate for the body, the mandate being the ultimate managing authority. At last, in March 2013, the body published its matured understanding of the GBC as the society's, quote, ultimate managing authority. So here's the excerpt from the resolution. Quote, when we use the word authority in the context of the managerial structure, we do not mean an absolute infallible authority, such as the authority of Scripture, but the mandate to organize the preaching movement so that it is aligned with the instructions of Srila Prabhupada. Unquote. Again, quote, the GBC is Prabhupada is a fiction because it is incomplete, identifying the oneness but ignoring the difference between ISKCON's infallible Founder-Acarya and its ultimate yet fallible managing authority, the governing body commission. Okay, and here's another impersonal fiction. I call it, Prabhupada is the guru only of his initiated disciples. A hangover from ISKCON's, quote, zonal acharya nightmare, this impersonal fiction arose from ignorance of the founder Acharya's personal, foundational role in the lives of all generations of his followers. In 1994, as Srila Prabhupada's centennial year was approaching, the GBC began to present a more definitive understanding of Srila Prabhupada's position by passing its first Founder-Acharya resolution. The resolution began as follows, quote, Srila Prabhupada is the foundational Shiksha Guru for all ISKCON devotees because he has realized and presented the teachings of the previous acharyas of the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya appropriately for the modern age, unquote. At ISKCON Mayapur, some 5 months after this resolution was passed, the day of Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja arrived. As the sun rose outside the temple, a Prabhupada initiate was chanting on his beads when he noticed a young devotee had stopped chanting to have a morning snack. Tactfully, the elder approached the younger. Quote, oh, Prabhu, maybe you didn't know. We're fasting till today for Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja, unquote. Squinting upward, the snacker shot back, quote, you say that because Prabhupada is your spiritual master. He's not my spiritual master, unquote. And with that, he resumed his snack. Incredulous, the Prabhupada initiate didn't know what to say. So he just walked away. Quote, I guess no one told him about that Founder-Acharya resolution. He mused, to give staying power to its legislation, the GBC needs to follow up with education, unquote. Fortunately, that's happening more these days. So to continue our lesson, let's identify and dispel some sentimental fictions about Srila Prabhupada. So now we're moving into a different section. It's called Sentimental Fictions. Quote, Illusory Prabhupada. This fiction draws its title from ISKCON educator Borijan Das's account of what happened while he and his wife, Jagatarini Dasi, were pioneering Krishna consciousness in Hong Kong. To attract Chinese people to Krishna in the early 1970s, Prabhupada had allowed Borijan and Jagatarini to adjust their appearance and dress. As guests started coming to their programs, more adjustments followed in their food, music, mood, and decor, which in turn attracted more guests. The Chinese were becoming devotees. As they adapted their outreach, however, Burijan and his wife also began to neglect their spiritual practices. Resting and rising later, they were chanting Hare Krishna without the support and focus the quiet early morning hours provide. They thought themselves too busy to study Prabhupada's books, and material desires began to re-enter their hearts. But, flush with success, they imagined they still had Prabhupada's approval. Then an aerogram arrived. In 2 weeks, Prabhupada will be arriving in Hong Kong, his secretary wrote. So, get ready. By the time Prabhupada arrived, Burijan and Jagatarini had prepared a beautiful rose garland and arranged a fancy hotel room. After picking him up in a Rolls Royce, they expressed to Prabhupada how wonderful it was to see him again. Turning to Burijan, Prabhupada was grave. Quote, "What is your morning program?" "Well, Prabhupada, we don't really have so many guests in the morning right now, so we usually don't have much of a morning program." Prabhupada disapproved. "Guests may or may not be coming, but why don't you have a morning program? Whose disciple are you?" Shaken awake, Burijan realized he had become a disciple of illusion. Quote, "I had been imagining a Prabhupada that allowed a compromise of purity and Krishna conscious practices. When I was suddenly confronted with the real Prabhupada, the illusory Prabhupada dissolved like mist after sunrise." Prabhupada, as he himself said, was 90% liberal, but that other 10% was strict. Unquote. Despite his disciples' preaching success, Prabhupada knew that if they continued to neglect their spiritual practices, they would gradually succumb to the Lord's illusory energy. To avoid becoming illusory disciples of an, quote, illusory Prabhupada, we need to continue living in the clear light of his protective instructions. Next sentimental fiction I call Figurehead Prabhupada. Not long ago, Queen Elizabeth II became England's longest-serving monarch, and perhaps the most popular one too, as the adoring crowds on her Jubilee tours attested. Yet the Queen has no real authority over her people, no parliamentary power like the Prime Minister. Elizabeth's influence is purely sentimental because, like almost all monarchs today, she is a figurehead. By contrast, when Srila Prabhupada toured ISKCON as its Founder-Acarya, he commanded absolute authority over his disciples. He did this by the transcendental knowledge he revealed, as well as by his own endearing example of pure devotional service. Keen to see his knowledge and example inspire all generations of his followers, Prabhupada took steps to protect his foundational role in ISKCON. One step was the introduction of his daily Guru Puja. In April 1974, after one of his morning walks on Bombay's Juhu Beach, Prabhupada went up to the temple as usual to offer his respects to the deities. At the time, the devotees would offer flowers both to the deities and to Prabhupada. But this morning, in plain view of the deities, Prabhupada sat on his dais to receive full worship, with his disciples singing Sri Guru Vandana, a traditional Bengali song glorifying the Guru. That's the title of Sri Guru Charana Padma. The song praises pure service to the Guru as the way to obtain the full mercy of God. Since Prabhupada was the only Guru in ISKCON at the time, when he introduced the hymn, his immediate disciples didn't realize its full purport. Today, as successive generations of gurus and disciples come together daily to sing to Prabhupada, the significance of his position as the Jagat Guru, our Founder-Acarya, continues to expand. Far from being a mere figurehead without real presence in the hearts and minds of his sincere followers, Prabhupada lives in the core of their very being. Janme, Janme Prabhu se, quote, he is my Lord, birth after birth, unquote. Only failure to follow Prabhupada's teachings will leave us with a sentimental figurehead Prabhupada, akin to the next despairing fiction. So the next fiction, I call it Gone Forever Prabhupada. On July 16th, 1975, at a packed press conference in Berkeley, California, a reporter challenged Prabhupada, quote, what will happen to the movement when you die? I will never die, Prabhupada replied. I shall live in my books and you will utilize. If Prabhupada's reply sounded defiant, it was also an invitation. To know Krishna and transcend death, anyone could read and apply the knowledge he was translating and explaining in his books, especially his followers, who rested as Prabhupada wrote through the night. The problem, he would chide them, is that they didn't read his books, for he was making himself most available. As inspirational as Prabhupada's personal presence was, his writings speak of a deeper intimacy by following his instructions. Indeed, this was his own experience while executing the order of his spiritual master. Although he was only with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta perhaps a half dozen times, he always felt him to be right by his side. Quote, now this is a quote from a Bhagavatam purport. There is no difference between the spiritual master's instructions and the spiritual master himself. In his absence, therefore, his words of direction should be the pride of the disciple, unquote. Although Prabhupada's form and initiations were certainly divine, it is his everlasting instructions that sustain us over time. Quote, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him, unquote. Another quote, living still in sound, unquote. Prabhupada will now dispel one more forever fiction. And now, Prabhus, I should alert you that we are coming toward the end, so please start formulating your questions, comments. So I call this Diksha Guru forever, Prabhupada. This sentimental fiction arose in the 1980s to counter zonal acharyas who were imitating the position of the Founder-Acarya. But to protest guru abuse by claiming the Founder-Acarya appointed himself as everyone's perpetual Diksha Guru betrays ignorance of Prabhupada's consistent teachings. So I'm going to give you a couple of quotes here. Here's a first quote. This is a letter. Quote, keep trained up very rigidly, and then you are bona fide guru, and you can accept disciples on the same principle. But as a matter of etiquette, it is the custom that during the lifetime of your spiritual master, you bring the prospective disciples to him, and in his absence or disappearance, you can accept disciples without any limitation. This is the law of disciplic succession. So that's a very key line there, because Prabhupada, he would never tamper with laws, universal principles. He would adjust their applications, but he would never tamper with the law. So this is the law of disciplic succession. I want to see my disciples become bona fide spiritual master and spread Krishna consciousness very widely. That will make me and Krishna very happy. And further, here's an excerpt from a talk, Bhagavatam talk. Quote, because people are in darkness, we require many millions of gurus to enlighten them. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is, he said, that, quote, every one of you become guru. And if you say, but I have no qualification, how can I become guru? Well, there is no need of qualification. Oh, still I can become guru? Yes. How? Whomever you meet, you simply instruct what Krishna has said. That's all. You become guru. Unquote. So there's no need to sentimentally, and by the way, illegally, appoint Srila Prabhupada as everyone's perpetual Diksha guru. Blessed are all of Prabhupada's disciplic descendants who already have him as their foundational guru, their Founder-Acarya. And blessed are the gurus who enrich, enhance, and deepen that foundational relationship. Finally, to protect us from the false pride that can prevent us from becoming the guru Lord Chaitanya wants us all to be, Lord Chaitanya reveals, Srila Prabhupada reveals the mood of a true guru. So this was in Vrindavan in October 1972. It's an extraordinary quote. Quote, a spiritual master takes his disciples as his spiritual master. That is the position. He thinks, Krishna has sent me so many spiritual masters. He does not think himself as spiritual master. He thinks himself their servant because they have to be trained. Krishna has appointed him to train them. Therefore, he thinks himself as servant of the disciples. This is the position, unquote. Full immersion in our Founder-Acharya's life, teachings, mood, and mission is the best prevention and cure for all kinds of, quote, fictional Prabhupads. Thank you very much, Prabhus. I'll be very happy now to receive your questions and comments. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Sureshvara Prabhu. Thank you very much for this wonderful narration and very important topic, which is yet very complicated and maybe very simple from another point of view. I just wanted to remind you, when you give your replies to the questions, please keep in mind we have simultaneous translation.
Right. Thank you.
Let me read you the question. Ludmila is asking, Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for your lecture. My question is, should we honor the disciples of Prabhupada who left the movement? Not honor, read their books, who left the movement. Or maybe we should learn from their negative example how to serve Prabhupada the proper way.
Mm-hmm.
Let me read the question. Okay, we have the translation.
Okay, it sounds like the question is, should we read the writings of Prabhupada initiates who left the movement, and can we learn by their example, I take it, what not to do?
Yes, I think so.
Uh-huh. Okay. I remember when I first joined ISKCON in the summer of 1970. There was a book, because I joined in Boston, and that's where ISKCON Press was. So we were producing Prabhupada's books before the BBT was really up and running. So there was one very interesting looking book. I was living in the basement of the Boston Temple where the books were bound, kind of the last stop on the production line. So I noticed one book, and it was Sri Chaitanya. Let's see, I forget the title now. Sri Chaitanya. Yeah, I forget the full title, but it was a book by a godbrother of Prabhupada's, Professor Sanyal, Nishikant Sanyal, whom I'm actually mentioned in an earlier lesson. So he was very literary, very scholarly, and he worked with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta a lot on the Harmonist English language Gaudiya Math Journal, and they worked on this book. Sanyal wrote it, and then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta edited it. So there was a letter to Prabhupada about that book. The devotees were asking if it's bona fide. And Prabhupada said, yes, it was bona fide because when he wrote the book, he was following. He was in the good graces of Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So, and he even said you can publish some excerpts from it in BTG. So there's a precedent there that if somebody who eventually did leave Prabhupada's movement wrote something and was following at the time, then perhaps it's okay. But the bottom line is whatever we read from anybody, whether they're whatever generation they are, or even if they're in ISKCON or not, or they should inspire us. They should be consistent with what Prabhupada teaches us, and they should inspire us to return to Prabhupada's teachings. That's the test of anything that we read or hear, because as I've said, we don't live in a vacuum. Things are going to come before us, and they might interest us. And depending on, as far as the second part of the question, can we learn by their example what not to do? Sure, of course. And, the way some people would leave Prabhupada's, sometimes they just left out of personal weakness. They weren't leaving out of, bad feelings, or they had a philosophical problem with Prabhupada's teachings. Sometimes they just left out of weakness. So that can be looked at. But some have left in kind of disgraceful ways. And if we happen to know the history, yeah, we can certainly learn what not to do. I don't know if I brought this up before, but when Sureshvara Prabhu, when he was, of course, the author of many volumes of his Transcendental Diary, when he was leaving Prabhupada's service in March 1977, he left for a good reason. And he wasn't leaving the movement, he was just leaving that service of being Prabhupada's personal servant. He approached Srila Prabhupada and he said, Srila Prabhupada, I think the time has come. I've been with you, I think he was with him for about 16 months total, between late 75 and early 77. I think the time has come for me to I forget exactly what he said, but change my service, because I can feel myself becoming a little familiar with you, and I know that's not good, and it could lead to offenses. I don't want to commit offenses. And Prabhupada, he very much appreciated Sureshvara's sentiment that that Harishari could feel himself moving into a dangerous position. So Prabhupada said, yes, this is very good. So it took them a while to figure out, what. Eventually Prabhupada asked Harishari to be the GBC in Australia. So, so that's good. That's a good way to change a service. Services can be changed whimsically, but they can be changed for a good reason too. Or people can leave the movement, just out of personal weakness and still think fondly of Prabhupada and follow as much as they can. So it's all very individual. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. I think that's the best I can do.
Thank you. We have one more question. How to find the balance, how to understand the balance between adjusting the preaching for people, just average people, regular people, who do not know anything about Krishna, and strictly following the mission of Prabhupada, adjusting and following that.
Yeah, this is a good question, and this relates to that first sentimental fiction I called Illusory Prabhupada, and I took that from Borijan Prabhu. Yeah, so how do we know when we're going too far with adjustments and we're actually straying? So let's revisit that incident. So I remember Borijan Prabhu wrote that the first thing he asked Prabhupada to do was if he could grow his hair a little longer, because they were all alone in Hong Kong, Borijan and Jagatarini, which is a vulnerable position to be in, especially for relatively young devotees. And they had to support themselves, so they were working all day. I think they were selling carpets or something, Persian rugs. I forget exactly what it was, but they were working. So at the beginning, they did have full deity worship, and they read Bhagavatam together. They chanted japa at the best time, the early morning Brahma Muhurta hours when it's sattvic. So then students began coming, but they began coming at night because they were busy with their studies all day. So they began to have a dinner program for them. And that really caught on. It became very popular at the university there. And so, but so Borijan and Jagatarini, they took Prabhupada's, because Prabhupada said, yeah, you can grow your hair a little, just keep it like a gentleman, as Prabhupada always said. You can just look like ladies and gentlemen. So from that one permission to make an adjustment, then they just, and it had appeared to work because, students were coming, and but then they began to stay up later because it was a night thing. And students came and they were preaching, would go into the night. And then because they were staying up later, then that was killing their morning program, because then they'd have to sleep later to have energy the next day to go to work. So their whole lives, it became opposite of the life Prabhupada had given us. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled, and the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. That's the famous Gita verse, chapter 2, text 69. And it's literally true. The lives of the materialist and the life of the spiritualist, they're kind of like night and day. So as they got up later, then they didn't have time for Bhagavatam reading and deity worship and japa. All they had time to do is basically take some prasad and go to work, and then leave And then after work, they would, maybe go to the beach and kind of mumble their rounds distractedly before the evening, dinner program. So this went on for but more students were coming. As I said in the script, the Chinese were becoming devotees. So because of the result, because Prabhupada had said, you have to judge a thing by its result, they took it that their adjustments were favorable and that it was okay, even though they were making many more adjustments than what Prabhupada had originally allowed. And they were, the lifestyle they were leading was becoming just the opposite of the lifestyle Prabhupada gave them. That's where you get strength, in those early morning hours. So when Prabhupada finally came, and Prabhupada always had this uncanny ability to know where his disciples were at, even without, after they they said, "Oh, Prabhupada," they garlanded him and then put him in the Rolls Royce, and it's so good to see you again. We haven't seen you in so long. So Prabhupada responded very unsentimentally. So, what is your morning program? He went right to the heart of the matter, their biggest weakness. Oh, Prabhupada, the students, they're coming in the evening, and so we don't, and so we're up with them, and so we don't have a morning program. So Prabhupada said, whose disciple are you? He immediately exposed their illusory thinking. They were, as Borijan said, we were imagining that out of Prabhupada's lenience, he would accept this. And he was lenient. Prabhupada said, I'm 90% liberal in another context. But that, as Borijan said, that 10% that was strict. He was strict with the regulative principles. He was strict with the rounds. He was strict with the whole life he gave us, because Prabhupada knew that, okay, it might look good now that the students are coming, but without that, the strength, the foundation of your daily sadhana in the favorable time, eventually you would succumb. You would just sort of, you would blend in with everybody else, and you would become just like the Chinese students. Yeah. So as I said, so how do we prevent ourselves from becoming illusory disciples of an illusory Prabhupada? By full immersion in Prabhupada's life, teachings, mood, and mission. That is the best prevention and the best cure, even if we do stray, to get back our identity as devotees. Yeah. So what looks good in the short term, it may not be good in the long term. Okay, good question. Are there any more?
Thank you. Yes. You know what? Do you remember that quote that sometimes is mentioned, that Prabhupada said, if you need for your preaching mission, you can even eat meat, but preach. Do you remember that? I don't remember it word for word, but so
yeah, but that's not exactly the quote.
yeah. So, but that's how I remember it. So the main thing is just follow this 10% that he was strict about.
Let me take what you just said, Sati, and you combine two quotes. The first one was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta telling his preachers in Europe that if you have to, serve them meat, just so they'll come to hear. If they're so addicted to meat that to hear about Krishna, and he didn't say they should cook it either or eat it, but to speak of eating it, he said that they should, you can serve it, hire somebody. That was the extreme, and that was extreme, but that was the radical answer that Prabhupada or Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave to those Europeans who were saying they're not receptive or they don't want to follow the principles and of course, one of the principles is no meat eating. But Srila Bhakti said that, Bhaktisiddhanta. And that's completely in line with Rupa Goswami, yena tena prakarena. Somehow or other get them to be Krishna conscious, get them to hear about Krishna. Sarve vidi nishedhasyor. All the rules and regulations should be made servants of that principle, just to get them to hear about Krishna, to become Krishna conscious. So that was one quote. And another quote was that, let's see, now I have to, well, there was one quote with Harikesh. I think, yeah, he was Swami at the time. So Prabhupada wanted to send him to Eastern Europe to preach. And so he felt very incapable and unqualified. So Prabhupada said, well, and he said, what about my consciousness? I don't want to have any association. So Prabhupada said, damn your consciousness. You just go and preach. So it's not quite related to meat eating, but it was another example of an extreme case where Prabhupada wanted something. And he knew, actually, he could see that Harikesh was capable. And later, when he did have success in Eastern Europe, Prabhupada said to him, you see, you thought I was sending you away. You thought I was exiling you, to Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union. But I knew that this boy is very intelligent. Why should he rot here, typing up, doing typing? And I mean, the rotting. I mean, he was transcribing Prabhupada's dictations for his books. He was doing a very valuable service. But Prabhupada had a higher thing in mind for Harikesh, because he could see this is a very capable person. He can do so much more. So do you understand? He was saying, I wasn't exiling you. I wasn't sending you away, but I knew you could do so much more. And so Harikesh, yes. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Let's see, what's the other one? Yeah, well, Prabhupada would always say that if there's nothing else to eat, sure, you can eat meat just to stay alive if you have to, but that's like super extreme example. And come to think of it, that might have been in connection with the Soviet Union too, because it was hard for them to get vegetables, and everything was scarce. Anyway, so yeah, we have to be careful with what we think we heard somebody say or what we heard Prabhupada said. We have to trace it. We have to go to the source. And we have such a good tool in the database. Not everything is there. Sometimes it wasn't recorded, but a lot of things are there. So if what we think we heard is consistent, and I brought this up too in the fictional Prabhupads, where there's no actual recording of Prabhupada saying, ISKCON is my body. But so many reliable devotees said Prabhupada said that. That's number one. And number two, he was recorded when he said, you are all the limbs of my body. So that was the same thing. He would say that BBT is my heart, you are all the limbs of my body. So we can safely conclude that Prabhupada did say that, ISKCON is my body, because devotees have given that testimony. Not just one, several. So we can safely assume that Prabhupada said that. And especially when we have him recorded of saying something exactly the same in different words. Okay.
Yeah, if we have time, we have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Srila Prabhupada's position as a preeminent guru. In our everyday life, we read his books, we listen to him, we try to follow him, study his life and words. Is there anything, like particular or any ways we can honor this position of Prabhupada as our preeminent guru? Something, practical for such regular people trying to be devotees.
Hmm. Well, it's very practical. The example I gave, where I think the sentimental fiction was Prabhupada is the guru only of his initiated disciples. So in 1974, when he only had initiated disciples still. He was still on the planet, 1974. So in Bombay, he instituted daily Guru Puja. And as I said, because Prabhupada was the only guru in ISKCON at the time, we didn't really realize the full import, full purport, ramification of that, of Prabhupada instituting a practice, adding something to the daily morning program that was pretty radical, because it says right in Nectar of Devotion that you shouldn't worship anyone before the deities, anyone else. You know, the deities are the deities. But Prabhupada, whose vision goes way beyond just a few years in Vapu Lila, to help ISKCON be sustainable and so that, and to ensure his position as Founder-Acharya, he instituted daily Guru Puja to himself, Sri Guru Charana Padma. So that's a very practical thing. If you're not living near a temple, you can certainly sing the song and offer maybe incense or a flower to Prabhupada's picture, and meditate on the words. As I brought that up with the Queen. Everybody loved the Queen when she toured her kingdom in 2012, and in 2012 it was her Diamond Jubilee, 60th anniversary of her coronation in 1952, and then in 2016 she toured again, because in 2016 she became the longest serving monarch in British history. So she toured again, and the people just love Queen Elizabeth. They still do. But she doesn't have any power. It's a love that's it's a love that's good. There's a sentiment for the Queen, but Queen Elizabeth doesn't have any power. It's a parliamentary democracy, and the Prime Minister has the power. Whereas, as I said, when Prabhupada was touring ISKCON, he was exercising absolute power, absolute authority over his disciples, because he was revealing so much. He was giving us so much transcendental knowledge. And of course, his example of the teachings was impeccable. We just loved, because he was working harder than all of us. So when we sing the Guru Puja, we should be mindful of what we're singing. Chakudan diloje janme janme Prabhu say. He opens my darkened eyes. It's his books, mainly, we're studying. Janme janme Prabhu say. He is my Lord, birth after birth. So do I know what I'm saying? Because Bengali is not my first language, but we should be mindful of what it means. He is my Lord, birth after birth. So that's for all generations of his followers, not just his initiated disciples. So that's very practical. The Guru Puja song is very powerful. And of course, reading the books. That was Prabhupada's that was his main criticism of us. You think the books are only for selling. You don't read them. I'm mainly writing them for you. Or first of all, people who actually become his followers, they can understand the best. And now it's, the Prabhupada or Christmas Marathon. And we're trying to distribute 2 million Gitas. That's great. Hopefully those seeds will be planted and they'll fructify in the association of devotees. But the ones that especially should be reading the books are the people who are saying they're following Prabhupada. So we can honor Prabhupada by singing to him at least the Guru Puja song, and know that's the Founder-Acharya song. In the morning when we sing Gaurvastakam, Samsaradava, that's more generic. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy. That can be more, you can think of more your own personal, manifest, I should say, Shiksha and Diksha Gurus. And Prabhupada, he's our foundational Shiksha Guru. But that Guru Puja song, that's more when everybody comes from all different God families, different Guru Maharajas and different Guru Devs. And we honor Prabhupada as the foundational spiritual master. And certainly we can honor him by following his instructions. He lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. So that's what sustains us. As I said, the Vapa is divine because it's used in Krishna service. And the initiation is divine because before the deities and the Vaishnavas and the sacred fire and the spiritual master, we make vows. It's a sacred rite of passage. But it's he lives forever by his divine instructions. And foundationally, that means Prabhupada's instructions. And blessed are those gurus who inspire us to follow those instructions, who enrich, enhance, and deepen our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Okay, good question.
Yeah, and a matching answer. Thank you very much. Very good thing. And I feel I have a better understanding of that. Why I should sing it in the morning, Gurvashtaka and the Puja. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have more of a short question, like a question reiteration. So enthusiasm, spiritual strength is directly defined by your sadhana, right?
Enthusiasm, what kind of strength?
Spiritual strength.
Oh, spiritual.
Spiritual.
Enthusiasm, spiritual strength, what's the rest?
That's it. Are defined directly by your sadhana.
Are derived, I would say.
Okay.
Derived?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
English is not my first language.
That's okay.
Thank you for correcting me.
Okay. Yeah, that's where we get our strength. Yeah, the hearing and chanting. Yeah, that's the essence of the sadhana, is hearing and chanting. Yeah, that's, as I mentioned, the ISKCON sandwich Prabhupada gave us. The hearing and the chanting, early in the day, and then the work, and then again at the end of the day, the hearing and chanting. Yeah, that's where we get all the strength, because that is what arouses our love of Krishna. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunoi Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Koraye Udoy. Pure love for Krishna, Lord Chaitanya told Sanatana Goswami, is eternally established in the heart of a living entity. It is not something to be gained from another source. It's in there. It's there in us. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, the living entity naturally awakens. So it's the hearing and chanting that ignites what's already inside us, that's sort of sleeping. Yeah. Yep. If we don't do that, we just dry up. It's like trying to use your cell phone without charging it. Eventually it just runs out, right? So yeah, we have to have that nice foundation. And then at the end of the day too, it's nice to help us take rest in a nice consciousness, hearing and chanting. Good questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think that are all comments and questions that we've got so far. Plus we have
Okay, let me give you the transition till next. And next lesson is our last lesson. On Sunday the 20th, we will end the Founder-Acarya Essential Series. So the transition is unencumbered by impersonal and sentimental misconceptions about Srila Prabhupada. In lesson 10, we'll look at how to cultivate our own personal, foundational relationship with His divine grace as his eternal loving servants. So it's how I end the series, how we do that. Because this is the Prayojana section, deepening our love for Srila Prabhupada. And yeah, we look at actually a few, we do it first of all by looking at the lives of some rather famous initiates of Prabhupada, but very different people. So we're all very different, right? We all have a very personal, individual, it's not a question of copying somebody else's relationship. No, we have to discover, with the help of our Shiksha and Diksha gurus, and of course, Srila Prabhupada, our own relationship. And it's very exciting, actually. And we can do that as long as we don't, if we're still hanging on to these impersonal and sentimental misconceptions, that's going to get in the way, because we'll have a wrong idea about Prabhupada. Okay, so we'll do that Sunday the 20th, same time, same link.
Yes, thank you very much, Prabhu.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sad, of course, that it is the last session next time, but we're still looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you. All right. I guess we'll leave now. Hare Krishna.